Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask if you would please take your seats at this time. We are getting very close to 9 o'clock. We have a bit of a tight time frame, and we are delighted at how many people are here. And we have a sneaking suspicion you all have questions, so we're going to do our very best to get to everyone. So if everyone would please take their seat. And I know the Senator will begin to make his way up here. And while he's doing that, let me first of all welcome Senator Jerry Moran, one of our 2 U.S. Senators for the great state of Kansas. And also the 2 ladies we know very well and work with all the time, Cindy Green from the Senator's staff and Margaret Gableman from the Senator's staff. Get to know those 2 ladies too. They have the man's view. Also, in our audience today, we have 3 elected officials, and let me recognize them right now. Board of Trustees from the KCK Community College, Mr. Wendell Maddox. The Mayor of the City of Edwardsville, and also, I just learned this morning, the Mayor of the Year for 2011, John Tiny McTaggart. And my favorite ribbon-cutting partner, Commissioner Tom Cooley from the Unified Government. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Senator's first town hall meeting in Wyandotte County, and I have to say this. I have heard so many people say, thank you for coming to Wyandotte County. Senator, thank you. We appreciate it. First of all, the Senator is going to say a few words, and then you'll notice we have a microphone over here. We're going to ask people to take turns to ask their question. Please make sure it's a question so we can get them all answered. And then I will warn you, I am going to be the timekeeper this morning. At about 5 to 10, I'm going to stand up and say, the next question is our last question because we do need to keep the Senator on his schedule. So please don't be mad at him. You can be mad at me, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, the Senator from the great state of Kansas, Jerry Moran.
My guess is that my voice will carry, and I prefer to be a little closer than I'm behind the podium. It doesn't look like a dangerous crowd, so I'm honored to be with you. This is my 53rd town hall meeting for 2011. I represented the folks who lived in the western 3/4 of Kansas for 14 years and conducted 69 town hall meetings every year, 1 in each county. And now I'm working hard to make certain that I understand the people and their issues and what they care about and what their priorities are in those 40-some other counties that comprise our state. I'm honored to represent Kansas in the United States Senate, and I will work hard to try to do the job well to the best of my ability. And these town hall meetings are significant in who I am and what I do and how I think. It helps me establish my priorities in Washington, D.C., what matters most. There's thousands of issues a member of Congress can get interested or involved in, but I want to make certain that I stay focused on the things that are the top priorities for Kansas. And I also think that Washington, D.C. is lacking in many instances. There's way too much partisan politics, Republicans versus Democrats and vice versa, and too little good judgment and common sense. And one of the things I think that is a significant attribute of Kansans is that we have good judgment and common sense. And so you are one of my last doses of good judgment and common sense before I go get on an airplane to go back to Washington, D.C. today. My family and I never moved to Washington, D.C. We live in Hayes. And so every Monday, every Friday, it's a 4.5-hour drive to KCI. And that also is a component of how I hope that I've been able to keep my feet on the ground, despite being in public service or politics for a long time, is that we live in Kansas, and our kids went to school in Kansas, go to school in Kansas. My wife plays the piano at the local high school. It's church on Sunday, grocery store, post office that gives me the chance for folks to kind of poke me in the chest and remind me of what's important to them. My wife is done sending me to the grocery store for the 5-minute loaf of bread or the carton of milk. Those are longer conversations, and Kansans have been nice to me. I've never had anyone, at least to my face, call me an idiot. But the conversations often in the grocery store is kind of that poking the finger and say, what in the world, Moran, are you idiots in Washington doing? It's just a nicer way of delivering the same kind of message, and I appreciate that. I am particularly interested in hearing what you have to say in Wyandotte County, and I don't say that in every county, but I guess it's true. But here, my guess is I have a lot to learn about the things that matter to you and a lot to learn about your community. Although I would tell you that I think Western Kansas and Wyandotte County have lots of things in common. Incidentally, Ellis County, for the longest period of Kansas history, has been the second most Democratic county in the state of Kansas, right behind Wyandotte County. So I grew up as I'm the only elected Republican in my county for a long time. When I was elected to the state legislature, it had been 25 years since they'd elected a Republican. And I also think that, so that in some ways has some commonality, but I also think that in Western Kansas, we often think that our elected officials pay little attention to us, don't understand us, and then we never see them. And I want to make certain that that's not the case, or not the feeling or the reality that you have about Moran and Wyandotte County. I have made numerous visits to Wyandotte County. I visited both of your hospitals, Providence and St. John. Been at Kansas City, Kansas Community College, and met with the president and a couple of trustees. Toured the campus and looked at programs. Was just recently here for Crosslines, a humanitarian educational effort trying to meet the needs of some Wyandotte County citizens. Was here for your. I was here to view your and visit the folks at your community health center. I leave here to go with Wyandotte County housing to look at housing issues in Wyandotte County, and then I speak later today in Bonner Springs at Rotary. So we will work hard at trying to make certain that you have access to me, and that you have a level of comfort that when you visit with me, or when you make a phone call, or you write me in Washington, D.C., that you got somebody who's paying attention. Generally, what I'm about, what got me interested in politics, and I come from a background that would never suggest that I would grow up to be a member of the United States Senate. My dad was a laborer, was a worker in the oil fields of western Kansas. My mom was a lady who paid your light bill too in our little town of 2,000 people. And I was a kid who was interested in politics and history and government, biographies and things I read. I met my congressman when I was in high school. It turned out when I was in college, he invited me to Washington, D.C. to be a summer intern. Turned out to be the summer of Watergate. I got fascinated by what was going on in our country and thought maybe someday I could do this and maybe do it better. But what motivates me for an interest in politics or public service is the belief that we live our lives in Kansas in a pretty special way. And I want to do what I can do to make certain that there's another generation of Kansans who have the opportunity to raise their families in the places that we all call home. And so much of what I've been about, I would call, is to Cindy, I would say I have a very Chamber of Commerce point of view. What can we do to make certain that there's a growing economy, that there's an opportunity for employment, that health care is being delivered, that education services are being provided. And those issues are slightly different from rural to urban, but again, for most of the time in the House of Representatives, I chaired the Rural Health Care Coalition, designed to make certain that all Kansans, all Americans have access to health care in their communities. And you may find it interesting that while it's called the Rural Health Care Coalition, it's 150 members of the House, Republicans and Democrats. About a fourth of our members were urban. Core city centers have so much in common with rural America as we try to figure out how we access. We have a high Medicaid population, a high Medicare population, and so in many instances, again, the things that matter or that are priorities have a lot in common with urban and rural. So that's my interest, is how do we make certain there's another generational opportunity for Kansans, that we live in great communities, we pass that on to the next generation. I will tell you that I do believe that we have a responsibility to get our financial house in order in Washington, D.C., that it is no longer an option. If we don't do this, the world markets, the world economy will do it for us. At some point in time, those we are borrowing money from will decide we're not a good credit risk. Interest rates will rise, the standard of living will fall, our balance of payments will. We are not immune from what you see happening in Greece and Ireland. I do think that when we go through this process of reducing spending, that we need to be reasonable, rational. We need to be smart in how we do it. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee. First time in 3 years a Republican freshman senator has been appointed to the Appropriations Committee. I also serve on the Banking Committee, which has to do with banking and urban development, including housing. I just was appointed last week to the Homeland Security Committee, which has certainly the big picture issue of protecting Americans in a time of terror, but also has very Kansas issues related to FEMA, to emergency preparedness, levees that protect us from floods, and so a wide array. And then 3 more committees. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, where I served for 14 years as a House member, and I'm working hard to make sure our veterans access health care in communities across our state, and the benefits process, which is so bureaucratic today, is improved. I serve on the Special Committee on Aging. Not that any of you qualify, but we have lots of senior citizens in Kansas. And finally, on the Small Business Committee. While I mentioned getting our financial house back in order, the part of that that's not very fun is talking about cutting spending. Everybody seems to have some program that they want to make certain is untouched or held harmless. Those conversations are not perfect ones for a politician. But the good side, the other side, and it's the more fun side of talking about getting our financial house in order is growing the economy. Putting people to work is a way to pay down the national debt, because the growth of our economy, people working pay taxes. And I guess I should mention, just last Monday on my way to the airport, I visited the GM plant here in Kansas City, Kansas, in which we talked about the exciting developments that have happened there over a recent short period of time, and the great potential that is there for job stability and job creation into the future. And it's those kind of things that I think, in my view, are going to be, it's the enjoyable part of being a senator, is working with local folks and businesses to try to create an environment in which they can succeed. And in the process of succeeding, put people to work. And I look forward to being a partner with the business community in Wyandotte County and with your Chamber of Commerce to see that those good things happen here. We were delighted about Google. I know the mayor is having a town hall meeting tonight in regard to EPA, and we want good things to happen here. We want you to have a prosperous and growing community in which families or husbands and wives are working, and family has food on the table. So I would be glad to take this conversation in whatever direction you'd like for it to go. And Cindy indicated you had to ask a question. I don't know whether I can overrule her; she's in charge. But
sure you can.
If you just want
You're
to,
the senator.
if you just want to complain, that's okay too. What would you like for me to know? Yes, sir.
Senator Jarvis Collier, Pleasant Green Baptist Church, Kansas City, Kansas. You referenced and will common sense and good judgment. Pertaining to the EPA matter, the EPA, the Dole Courthouse, United Way, the Children's Campus are all clustered together. The proposal on the table now is to take 600 jobs, EPA jobs, out of the urban core of Kansas City, Kansas, and relocate those jobs to Lenexa, Kansas. I believe, and I believe many of our community members, especially African Americans, feel that we ought to have some opportunities for jobs, economic benefits. We're told there is a presidential executive order which establishes where federal buildings ought to be located in cities across America. And in that light, common sense, good judgment. No one can make, in my judgment, a credible argument that Lenexa, Kansas needs jobs, economic opportunities more so than urban Kansas City, Kansas. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and ask your support. I'm hosting tonight, our church is hosting tonight, that EPA-related mass meeting with the mayor. We wish you could have been with us, and if you could, the invitation sent.
If the flight is delayed,
All right.
I'll be glad to be with you. Mayor Reardon and I have had a number of conversations on this topic, in person, over the phone, and with staff. And so I'm been made very much aware of the challenge that would arise should the GSA's decision to move EPA elsewhere occur. Senator Dole has also lobbied me. He's also very effective, as is the mayor, in making the point. And as I understand it, you are correct. There is an executive order that suggests that says that when making decisions about location, there's a number of criteria to be considered, but you ought to encourage the development of jobs, opportunities in core center of cities. I have talked to the GSA on this topic and encouraged them to remember that executive order. Thank them for only considering Kansas. I hate to be so provincial, but we did not want to lose EPA across the line. And to indicate that they need to make certain they take into account the cost of moving and the dislocation of employees and the pattern of daily life that comes from EPA being here, and the more scientific building research that occurs adjacent, 2 blocks away. And so we made this case, as I understand it, that, and after that, maybe this is the sign of a 4-month senator, but after that, the GSA made a different decision. And so I'm certainly open to the mayor, to yours, to others, perhaps after tonight's town hall meeting, if there's specific request of me. I don't think I have the ability to tell, I certainly know I don't have the ability to tell the GSA what to do, but I do want them to know how important this issue is to the community of Kansas City, Kansas. And if you have suggestions of something specific that is your request of me, other than encouraging and having the necessary information to make an intelligent, common sense, and good judgment decision. I don't want, the GSA is designed to make certain that we don't spend money needlessly, and that we don't overpay for prices of leases or land, and that makes sense to me, but also they need to take into account these other issues. And I don't exactly know, and you all would have a better feel than I do, whether this, originally I thought maybe this was just a negotiating technique with the landlord, but it's gone much further. So I welcome input. Yes, sir. Are we changing subjects?
Yes.
All right. Anybody else want to give me instructions on EPA? Just excuse me, just 1 minute.
I guess in your discussion with the GSA, Senator, I would suggest that they take into consideration that when that building was constructed, I think it was state of the art at the time in terms of green technology. And one of the arguments that we're hearing for their decision is they could go to a platinum LEED certified property, or would be built for that at some point. That's kind of moving I think, changing the rules in the middle of the game. We did that, I think, in good faith, constructed that property. At the time, state-of-the-art technology in terms of green technology. And now, because maybe there's, I just think that should be heavily considered as kind of moving the boundaries on us in midstream.
I also should mention I've visited with the EPA Region 7 administrator, who seems perfectly satisfied to be where the office is. So I don't have the sense that it's an EPA-driven.
Right.
And again, I don't know whether it's just, I thought it was negotiating techniques to get the best deal possible. Ma'am, same topic?
Yeah.
Let me go to this gentleman then. Yes, sir.
Senator, I direct an after-school and summer program for inner-city kids here in KCK. And one of the things that I see is the greatest need in our community is the passage of the Dream Act. It's been reintroduced very recently. I see a lot of kids, immigrant kids, who have a lot of potential. They excel in school. They're great members of our community. They're members of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H, our churches. But when they graduate from high school, doors are closed to them. Even though, in all likelihood, they're going to be members of our society for the rest of their lives. When doors are closed to them, not only are their opportunities limited, but as a society, we're not able to take advantage of their gifts fully. Research has clearly shown, when you talk about economic development, that if the DREAM Act passed and these kids were able to get a college education, it would contribute to the prosperity of our economy. I know on your website you've said that you don't support the DREAM Act because it's...
I can't finesse this one with you, can I?
more comprehensive immigration reform and a tight border, and that may be true, and I understand that, but the fact is, there are thousands of kids, hundreds of them here in our community in Kansas City, Kansas, who have doors closed to them every day, whose personal lives are affected, who can't go any further in their lives and reach their potential because of our law. And the DREAM Act, it doesn't address some of the bigger issues, and that's fair enough. But I really feel that if the DREAM Act were passed, we would all benefit as a society.
Thank you. I think that, and I may be describing myself more than others, so I'm generalizing. I think many Americans, in the broad sense, are very interested in enforcing the law. It's about the best way I can say that in the broad sense. But as soon as we know somebody who has slipped through the cracks, we become very compassionate, very concerned. We want to take care of the individual. And a concern that I've had with the DREAM Act is a couple of things. One, I think the DREAM Act is a state issue as compared to a federal issue, in the sense that education, and again, immigration is a federal law. I certainly wouldn't discount that. But decisions about tuition and acceptance into our universities is decided in Topeka, not in Washington, D.C.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
And that's true, and I agree with that. But even when kids can get a college degree on a state level, if they don't have papers, they can't get a job. If they're not here legally, if they can't get some kind of residence.
So yours is a little bit
or-
broader than, your issue is a little bit broader than just education. It's how do we make these folks legal
Yeah,
in
and
their
the DREAM
status?
Act would do that. The DREAM Act would let them go to college or join the military and work towards citizenship or permanent residency, which would allow them they would get a college education, but then also then they could get a job, which, you know, even if schools will let them in and give them a degree, and there are some universities, more so private universities, that will do that, but once they get the degree, they still don't have papers, and so they can't get a job.
We have the DREAM Act in Kansas, true?
We have
Teresa,
in-state
sister, excuse me.
tuition since 2004, and I would mention that the Kansas legislators, every year there's been a push,
To
and
undo.
Representative Burrows can tell you that, to repeal it, and although the Kansas House said yes, the Kansas Senate said no, the committee 7-1.
As you'll remember, the Senate is a much better place than the House.
Amen.
My sister lobbied me when I was a state senator.
Yes, we do. And we have some powerful testimony from young people. I see District 500 people right here, and Mr. Smith gave testimony, but powerful testimony from young people who use the DREAM Act, and I tell you, we want them in our community. Yeah.
Message received. Sir, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am, and then I'll come back.
And if they're working legally, then they're going to pay Social Security and they'll pay the bills.
There you go.
Well,
Revenue.
generally my view is that we can't do things that encourage people to break the law to come here. And I think that has a lot to do with making certain that employers have the necessary tools to determine whether or not a person who is applying for a job, who is on the payroll, is here legally. You know, as a House member, I represent the most Hispanic district in Kansas, which may be a surprise to you and somewhat of a surprise to me. The 1st District of Kansas, the rural part, has more Hispanic than any. And it's Garden City, Dodge City, Liberal, Emporia, Great Bend. And I also obviously represent the most agricultural intensive part of Kansas, in which those people's presence here is important in the ability to milk cows, to slaughter beef. It is a huge component of our labor force. And in fact, if you look at the part of Kansas that at least historically had any growth in population, it's been southwest Kansas because of the influx of additional people. I certainly think that immigration is a necessary and useful thing to refurbish, reintegrate, that's not the right word, what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody
Renew.
mumbled it. Re-energize, thank you. Re-energize our people. I do want to make certain that we don't create incentives for more people to break the law until we get a border situation, and that border includes more than just the border, it includes the employment circumstance. So I'm interested, as you know, President Obama, I guess I was disappointed to kind of hear the president's speech about immigration. It seemed to me to be more of a political kind of campaign rally than it did, let's figure out how to solve this problem. But obviously there's a huge issue here that needs to be resolved, and I will work to be a constructive part of finding that solution. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Cynthia Gerald, and I'm wearing 2 hats today.
Okay.
One is a 30-year resident of the state of Kansas, and the other is as the federal policy coordinator for the Transportation Equity Network. I've met with some of your staff in D.C., which is part of the NAIL, the all around the country, congregations coming together to address racial and economic equity issues,
Okay.
and specifically around the transportation issue. Last month, the House passed a concurrent resolution, number 34,
Okay.
and that has been sent to the Senate, and it in essence calls for a 28% decrease in transportation programs this fiscal year.
Right.
So you know exactly what my question is going to be, so let me give you just a little bit more information before I do ask the question. Last year, fiscal year 2010, the federal government obligated $130,421,305 to the 3rd District. That money resulted in a maximum of 5,348 jobs. And that's by industry standard. You can go to anyone, you can go to Acton, you can go to Ashton, you can go to any of those places, and they will tell you that's the number of jobs that are generated or maintained with those dollars. So, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
I'm glad to clarify.
I just want to say, tell me how the money was used.
Yes, that money was used to build bridges, repair bridges, build roads. It was used to invest in a bus rapid transit line here in KCK. Actually, the beginning stations here in KCK. There are a number of ways that it was used to improve the infrastructure in this community, as well as other places in the 3rd District.
Okay.
So, now the other piece of that is that for every, and this also is an industry standard, for every $1 that the federal government invests in a community through transportation infrastructure, there is a $6 return in economic development. So my question to you is, we've already for FY20 allowed and decreased the transportation investments that the federal government will commit to. Now we're talking about another 28%. That's 28% off of this number of jobs. This community needs jobs, absolutely needs jobs. And so we're not even talking about creating new jobs. We're talking now about cutting jobs when we have an unemployment rate that's unacceptable at this time in the history of this country. And it's absolutely unacceptable in a community that cannot afford to lose any more jobs. So my question of you is, and back to your comments about how partisan Washington has become, does your common sense and good judgment and civility...
I see my words are being thrown back.
I'm sorry to tell you like this, but this is a really important issue to all of us.
No, I think when you're done asking your question, I'm going to tell you that I am an infrastructure supporter.
Are you going to vote for this?
I don't know about concurrent resolution 34. I actually don't know the details of that legislation, but I know what you just told me. And it makes little sense, and I don't want to be hypocritical about this. I am on the side that we've got to reduce spending. I don't think much is off the table as we look at the ways to do that. But I think it would be very short-sighted to significantly reduce infrastructure spending for a reason that you said, which is jobs, the kind of direct impact. But also as a Kansan, to go back to your 30-year Kansan story, we live in the middle of the country, and if we're going to have economic prosperity here, our ability to connect with the rest of the world economically, to get our agricultural products to market, to get our manufactured goods to the rest of the world, is determined by whether or not we can connect in a transportation system. And our lack of investment in transportation and infrastructure over a long period of time causes us already to be at a competitive disadvantage with other countries who are investing significantly in the future of their economies through infrastructure. And roads and bridges, highways are a significant component of that. Rail matters to us. And I've also, I say this as a nearly 14-year member of the House Transportation Committee, that in my view, this is a place in which investment, there are things in which we can spend money on that increase the amount of revenue that actually comes to the federal government. So you can spend $1 and get more money back. It's what you call about that multiplier effect. And it saddens me that so much of the stimulus package, which was promised to be infrastructure, did not end up being that. And that, as we struggled to figure out how to pay for a new transportation bill, we missed an opportunity. Several years ago, when the stimulus money became kind of something to everyone, in infrastructure, Joe Dick is here, it has to do with water, electricity, and sewer, and there's a lot of infrastructure needs that are not being met. And so, from a Kansas perspective, this is an important investment. From the economic point of view of our country competing in a global economy, it matters. And again, I don't know the answer to your question. If it really does cut transportation infrastructure investment by 28%, I can't imagine that's anything I would support. But we will work to try to find that common sense and good judgment answer to this issue about we can't afford everything. But let's be smart about what we do, and we ought not cut off our nose to spite our face.
Thank you, and this is a place that we can really step beyond partisan boundaries, because we all, I think, believe in investing in our community. So thank you for your history in the House, and we appreciate what you've done.
Well, and in the House, we were supporters of your efforts for mass transit, for community transit here, and in Topeka and Wichita. It's a bit more urban issue. In my world, in the past, it was how do we get a van to get people from Overland to Hayes to the dock. And some of those issues aren't that much different from the ones you have here in Wyandotte County. Yes, sir?
Yes, Senator, you mentioned you were at the General Motors plant last week. I work for the drainage district, the Fairfax Drainage District, that protects the Fairfax Industrial Park down there. So levees is my job, and keeping people dry. In 2006, feasibility study was completed, that you're probably familiar with, about all the downtown levees. And in that feasibility study that the Corps did, they determined that section of the flood wall over at the BPU Condero Power Plant was deficient in its original design and construction back in the 40s. And so we have been involved in trying to get some WRDA language passed so that the federal funding and local funding percentage that was in effect at the time the project was first built could be implemented to fix the flood wall. I think it was 100%, 0%. As a sponsor, we have not done anything to have poor maintenance on the system. There's been no damage to it. It's a matter that's intrinsic to the original design and construction. So my question is, I think the last WRDA bill was passed in 2007, and it used to be done on an every other year basis. So what are the odds of a new WRDA bill passing at this point? And I'll just leave it up to you. I might mention to you, too, that we have completed our levy certification. It went to FEMA last week, so we're waiting to hear back from them. But we're trying to do our job, so we're not a headline item like they have been on the Mississippi in recent days.
These levy issues are huge. They're significantly expensive. The ability to certify is a challenge. And almost without exception, it seems to me that the Corps and FEMA have been not terribly, being lighter than I need to be.
Right.
Unless somebody from the Corps is here, they've not been very helpful. And it is one of the reasons that my recent appointment of Homeland Security, which has jurisdiction over FEMA, is I hope useful in getting their attention. For the first time, I had the Undersecretary of Homeland Security call and want to come see me, always before I've been knocking on her door. So I like this kind of reverse role. And incidentally, I have the department's, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I have the department's appropriations. I'm on that subcommittee. And excuse me, my mom always told me not to point. My committee assignments this year are not the Committee on Transportation in the Senate, but it is the Appropriations Committee where I'm on the Transportation Subcommittee. So we're back in the middle of those issues again. We'd be glad to work with you on the right language in WRDA. I can't answer your question very well about the likelihood of a WRDA bill passing. This is now wrapped up in this ban on earmarks, and the question has been for a while whether or not WRDA are considered earmarks, and the answer generally, at least in the House, has been yes. In my view, and I thought we needed to do something to reform earmarks. I was on that side. believe that they became a way of life. I actually had times in which the Appropriations Committee would come to me on a big spending bill. So, you know, the $500,000 is designed to buy your support for $1.6 trillion worth of spending. We've got to get out of that habit. But there are many things, and WARDA is an example in which that's the way that the funding has accrued. I mean, it's just the way over history that it's been done. Agricultural research, for example, something that I care about from my days in the House, is nothing but earmarks at K-State. It's been that way forever. It's not a program. And so we've got to work our way through what the definition of an earmark is.
Exactly.
And WARDA is going to...
Because our projects are fully vetted by the Corps. I mean, it's been through all the studying, the options have been chosen.
One of the definitions of an earmark is something that hasn't been authorized by Congress. And WARDA would be different in which the administration, the Corps of Engineers, has approved these projects. It's not a member of Congress putting something special in a bill. It's worked its way through the process and has a priority. So please continue this dialogue.
Are they talking about a word?
We are.
Okay.
Yes. It is a topic of conversation. Yes, sir.
Glad to see you, Senator.
Nice to see you again. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry I don't have some donuts to share with you. If I can come to Washington, and as you know, I'm the environmentalist, and talk to you about our need for clean air. I don't know if you got a chance to read that paper or not.
I did.
But now you're here.
This guy just twisted my arm 2 weeks ago.
Now that you're here, I want you to, I'm really reaching out for your moral consciousness in the decisions.
Hard for me not to take that bait.
The decision that has to be made in D.C. that's dealing with clean air or clean energy, and be cognizant of the fact of that. Like the paper I gave you, what we're dealing with in the Quindale community. I'm working with some groups, and we're trying to empower people, trying to take the responsibility off the agencies to be the one. Like I hear a lot of talk about saving EPA, and EPA is here to deal with the environmental concerns. I need to hear more talk about the environmental concerns coming from this audience also. Because we do have those issues. You saw the number of people we have dying over the community, how many people we have with emergency rooms over the community. We want to empower them, and we need help in supporting some type of program that we're going and talking to. We're doing it right now on a smaller basis, but I think it needs to be done on a bigger basis, where we have more people trying to talk to people about being conscious of the fact of what they're living in and the conditions they're living under, because we can't be there to tell mom and dad and mama to bring the kids in when they see a cloud of smoke going overhead, but it'd be nice if they do that. So anything that you see that's happening in that area, I appreciate your focus.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Hello, Senator.
Welcome back to Washington County. 5 years, 6 years before the next year election, you're out here early, talking to people, being involved. I'm grateful. We're grateful for that. We just finished up our session in Topeka. $71 million we put in the bank. Certainly, your time with the Kansas legislature, you realize what that means. During these times, there's great concern that we're going to put back $71 million or keep that when we actually have to increase many of the costs of our state employees' pay and what have you. The ripple effect is the question. I make a brief question, and please expect.
I know you better than that.
Last year, this time, it was an interesting debate, wasn't it? And I'm delighted that you're in this position. I really am. I do want to say that and welcome, Senator, honestly. We're looking at the debt ceiling. We've hit that on a national basis. We're also looking at what our ceiling should be here at the state level in Kansas. When it comes to looking down the road and what we pass on to our children and grandchildren in terms of indebtedness of what we accrue right now, would you please share with us how you meet that challenge as we look at extending our debt liability, perhaps, hopefully, because we have to, and how, in fact, we reconcile that with future expenditures, current and future expenditures that we have nationally as we continue to try to wrestle with that here in Kansas.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your public service. I mentioned it just perhaps in passing, although I'm always told that my answers are very good, so maybe it wasn't in passing. My belief that the debt is the big issue that we face nationally. It was a motivating factor for me to run for the United States Senate. I really was ready to get out of this business that we're in and go live a, quote, normal life. My wife incidentally said, oh, no, you can't do that. You're called to this. you're good at what you do, the country needs you. I thought, this doesn't sound like my wife at all. Then it occurred to me, oh, she likes the fact that I'm only home 2 days a week. In a more serious vein, I watched our daughter walk across the graduation stage at Kansas State University last year, and this sense of responsibility hit me. Surely there is an opportunity for another battle, another fight to try to get this country in the financial shape that it needs to be, so that our kids and grandkids can live with liberty and freedom guaranteed by our Constitution and have the chance to pursue the American dream that we described for the students that you know. I think our primary responsibility as citizens, everybody in this room, me as a member of the Senate, but all of us, primary responsibility we have as Americans is to pass on to the next generation this American dream. And I think we've been overly selfish. We've been terribly selfish over a long period of time. If these government programs that we say we like are good, then we've got to pay for them. I would say that one of the grave mistakes we made in the financing of our country was the decision to go to war and not to pay for it. It was a mistake. People to sacrifice their lives, then we as I worry that we have set the stage in which only our soldiers and their families pay a price. And in many ways, I think the Bush administration tried to downplay the consequences of a war. The cost, how easy it would be. Perhaps I wondered, but my point is that we need to get back in which we're making decisions that are for the good in the long term, not the next re-election. And I'm using the debt ceiling issue as an opportunity to encourage the president to engage on this issue of reducing spending and growing the economy. And as I said earlier, the distasteful part of this conversation is all the things we can't afford to spend money on anymore. And the more enjoyable part of that conversation is, can't we grow the economy? Get an environment in place in which a business person, small businessman or woman, an entrepreneur says, I got an idea, and I want to take it to market and see if I can succeed. And in the process of seeing if they can succeed, they put people to work. So I think there's two ways to address this, the more difficult and the more enjoyable, and we ought to be doing both. And my request to the president is to use his leadership. Nothing that the Congress passes will occur without a presidential signature. And therefore, and there are those who say, well, you don't want to compromise, you want to work together. You hear this in your life. But the reality is we have a Republican House, Democrat Senate, Democrat President, and none of this stuff comes together in which we've actually accomplished anything on reducing the debt without the president. And so my hope is that there is enough kind of pushback on raising the debt ceiling that we make it difficult enough that the president recognizes that he has an opportunity. And I don't mean to just single out the president, but he is the important player in this. And it's not, I try not to be partisan in my commentary. We need this president to engage in this issue today so that we can make certain that the next generation of Americans has that bright future. And we all ought to be willing to come together and try to figure out what that bottom line is. So the debt ceiling is, I voted against it from time to time as a Republican when it was President Bush asking for an increase in the debt ceiling. And got my arm twisted several times in which I voted the other way. And it's one of those issues that you've seen reported that Republicans oppose it when it's a Democrat president, Democrats oppose it when it's a Republican president. It's not the way that government ought to operate, and there's way too much politics in this issue. We've got to solve these financial issues. And again, I think my whole life I've heard that this is the turning point, this is the moment in our country's history. I don't know that I ever believed those things before, but I believe them today. And in the absence of us making, and this is not just a partisan political, again, all our lives we've heard Republicans talk about balancing the budget and paying down the debt and spending less money, and it's just kind of one of those things that we kind of write off as just more political talk. But this is not just politics, because I think there are real consequences to us failing to do it. Economic studies, everything that I've read tells me that we have the magnitude of the debt that we have today. Every tax dollar that we take in would pay for Social Security, Medicare, the so-called entitlement program, and nothing else. 40% of what we spend is debt. We get to May, we get to this month, and we're already through all of our money that we've raised in taxes, and everything else for the rest of the year is going to be paid for by debt. Economically, it just can't work. And so, again, it doesn't have to be overnight, but put us on a path and send a message to the markets that the American political class, I don't like that word at all, but the American leaders get it. Send a message to the markets that we're going to solve our budgetary problems. And if we don't do that, interest rates rise, standard of living falls. It affects every American. This is not just a political setting, trying to set the stage for the next presidential election. This is about the lives of everybody in this room, everybody in this community, everybody in Kansas, everybody in America. Yes, sir.
My name is Ray Rivera. I'm a student at Arrowhead in the school.
Do you get extra credit for being here?
Excuse me?
Do you get extra credit for being here? Maybe school's out.
They are 5 members of our Arrowhead debate team. So
Okay, I'm very nervous now.
No, they're well trained in proper Robert's Rules of Order, so they're good to go.
All right.
In your website under economy, you stated that you oppose every bailout plan and stimulus package, and I see why logically that's a good answer. And you also stated that Americans are struggling, and unfortunately, Washington's unusual and reckless to throw taxpayer dollars at this problem is not the right answer. What I want to know is what you think is the right answer.
The right answer is living within our means. The right answer is figuring out how we pay for the things we say we want. And in my view, the government is too big. The federal government in particular is too big. We don't do things very well. Particularly we Kansans are at a disadvantage because the solutions that come from Washington, D.C. are one-size solutions that fit problems that aren't our problems. We haven't talked about education except for the DREAM Act, but for example, No Child Left Behind to me is a terrible federal program forced upon us when we didn't need it. And I thought where your senator was going to go was to talk about education in the light of the legislature, the $70-some million ending balance. When I'm in Sharon Springs in western Kansas, say, what are you doing to keep our school doors open? When I'm in Blue Valley, they'll say, what are you doing to make sure we have high-quality education? And the answer is most of those decisions are going to be made in Topeka or locally, but what I'm trying to do is get rid of the mandates that increase the cost of education and don't improve the quality. And in my view, No Child Left Behind, which I voted against, is passed overwhelmingly President Bush's #1 priority, but a terrible intrusion. And I think unfortunately, I think it's ruining the teaching profession. Perhaps you're a teacher if I listen to the way what you were telling me. That if we make teaching a bureaucracy, if it becomes about in-service and teachers' meetings, about testing, and I would tell you that debate is not one of those things that's tested. So the things that you care about, the things that have engaged these students, will receive less priorities by our schools, despite the fact that we have decided locally, our local Board of Education, that we believe in this, that this is important. My wife, who plays the piano at the high school in Hayes, would tell me music matters. She's my wife, and I say, yes, ma'am. I think vocational education is important. And we don't have the vocational education programs that we had in the past because we test 3 subjects. And so I'm using your question to point out there are just examples in which the federal government has decided they know best and they don't. I'm a believer in the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which we should have paid a lot more attention to over a long period of time, and our history would be different, which said all those powers that are not specifically granted to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people. A decision here in Wyandotte County about your schools is much better than a decision coming from the U.S. Department of Education. And that's the kind of overall picture that it's spending less money, it's paying our bills, and it's making certain that government doesn't get involved in things it doesn't belong in and doing things that it doesn't do very well. Yes, sir?
2 things you mentioned. The Constitution.
Yes, sir?
And who's going to pay for it. Those are the 2 very important things to me. We no longer follow the Constitution, but it might as well be toilet paper. Because that's the way we treat it. There's nothing that we're doing today that follows the Constitution. And if you don't believe it, look it up. Take a look. If you don't know what the Constitution says, read it again. It's not that long. It's not that terrible. My God, we've drifted so far astream, so far away from it. And there are legislators, you'll have to excuse me, Senator, there are legislators who think the Constitution is nothing but an old piece of paper and should not even be followed. Now, come on, folks. If you believe that, why don't we just turn it all in? The hell with it. Why are we fooling around? We're holding these meetings, we're all voicing our opinions, and that's fair, and that's the way it should be. But to me, the Constitution of the United States, as written by the founders, I know a lot of people will disagree with that, but I really don't care what they think. That's my thought. Perhaps I'm one of the few that thinks that way, myself and my younger sister, and that's it.
Did you influence her?
No, sir, I did not. It just bothers me. The question, the Constitution as written, and who is going to pay for it? That's the question. Those are the two main questions. Everything else is just add-ons. I know everybody here has their own ox that's being gored, and I understand that. But we've got to look at it from the perspective of the country. We're indebted to China of all people. Britain's being run off the map. France is gone. Greece, you might as well wipe your floor with it. And the country's falling apart. And we've got elitists, so excuse the expression, who want to make our country the same as socialist Europe. I disagree with you.
Amen.
I disagree with you. We are a different entity, and that's why this country was started. To flee the oppression, the oppression of European monarchs. We don't need a monarch here. We need to go back to our Constitution. This is what drives our country. This is what can maintain our country, and this is what can satisfy everybody's will. It's just that easy. I know it's tough to do, and I know you're in a funny position because you know I'm going to nail you with funny questions anyway, as I've demonstrated in the past.
Have we seen each other before?
Never.
I appreciate your care, your genuine interest in the future of our country. The Constitution, in my view, is a sacred document. It matters. It's not a guideline. It's the direction for how we are to govern our country. And we are. You talk about the town hall meetings and the Tea Party, the active participation by American citizens. I think it's had a huge difference. It made a huge difference in Washington, D.C. Maybe huge is too strong of a word, but for the first time in my time in Washington, D.C., all the conversation is about how do we reduce spending and get the deficit under control as compared to how much more money can we spend. And there's a magnitude of difference in people's view on what needs to be done, but it is a turn of the corner that would not have happened but for public input and the elections that occurred.
Okay,
Yes?
Senator, now I'm going to get you into trouble because this has to be the last question, but I think we heard a promise from you that you will be back.
Did I say that?
Yes.
Do you want to pick the last questioner?
No, sir, I'll leave that to you.
A woman.
A woman. Maybe we'll do two. Yes, ma'am, or ma'ams. I don't know whether you're together.
I just want to say that, that you talk about spending and the need to control spending, and yet, corporations like General Electric and ExxonMobil pay less tax than I do. So there are instances where they're receiving subsidies that they don't need, where they're not paying their taxes, where we have certain members of our society who are hedge fund managers, for example, pay less in taxes than their assistants. And so I think that one of the ways we could get out of our debt is to ensure that everyone is paying what they're supposed to be paying.
In my view, we need a dramatic overhaul of our tax code. And people will complain to me about taxes and the amount they pay, which I understand, but I think there's perhaps an even bigger issue about the method by which they are collected and paid.
We're paying less tax now than we paid in the 50s, and we have a different kind of society now than we had in the 50s.
I think the income tax code needs to be scratched. We need to start over, and we have to compete in a global economy, so our tax rates matter. You can't tax business out of business. They'll go someplace else. But we need to, and again, I say this with a smile on my face because I've never seen any evidence in Washington, D.C. that there's a willingness to do this, because too many entities have a vested interest in the way the tax code is today. But it is a mess, and most Americans ought to be able to file their tax return without professional help, and we ought to be able to live our lives without deciding whether or not deciding what the consequence is of this decision. We limit our lives. We limit in our lives our freedom to make choices that are good for our families and for our businesses based upon what the tax consequence is, as compared to the better position of being what's good for us, what's good for my family, what's good for the future, how do I invest? Last question, Jeff.
Senator, thanks for being here. I'm an employer in Wyandotte County, and I pay a tremendous amount of taxes. So don't anybody think that employers are getting off scot-free, because we're spending an incredible amount of money. One of the issues that I deal with here is that my company is constantly being recruited by other states to move there and take all those jobs with us. The cost of doing business in Kansas is extremely high. There's an Ernst & Young report that just came out that ranks us 48th out of 50 states in attractiveness for job growth. And we've got to correct that. There was also another one that just came out that shows us dead last against all other 50 states, ranking us as, gosh, just lost my train of thought on this important point too. Well, I'll try to remember what it was, but it was a terrible statistic. In job growth, we were only 3 of the 50 states actually lost jobs last year, and we lost 6,000. The next worst was like 1,600, and I think Texas created 250,000. So we've got a lot of work to do in Kansas, and the senator knows it was a very difficult session. My question of you is, from the federal government side, because I'm a believer in the Constitution, what can you do to allow the states to be able to make the appropriate changes we need to by eliminating these mandates, specifically on Medicaid and many of the other things that prevent us from actually dealing with the huge problems that we have here in our state?
It is the whole, let me say that less broadly, one of the major topics of this congressional session will be the mandates, the effect upon decisions in Washington, D.C. upon states, and the opportunities to allow states to make decisions that allow their economies to grow. Lots of examples, and I have no doubt but what some of these will succeed and others will fail just because of the necessary votes to get them passed. So I think that the broad answer to your question is this is the topic of conversation, is how do we grow the economy in a way that is not one-size-solution-fits-all from Washington, D.C., and doesn't bankrupt the states in the mandates that are required of them. Governor Brownback, at least in listening to his campaign, seemed to me to be saying, I'm running for governor for this reason. We want to make Kansas a lot more like Texas, job growth, and a lot less like California, job loss. And I talk to folks somewhat regularly who choose to retire someplace else than Kansas because of our tax structure, who decide that once they get their business on the ground, there's someplace else to go before they sell it, so they can realize a different tax consequence upon the sale of their property. We need to create an environment in which we draw people to Kansas, not send them away. I'll violate Cindy's last question or comment. Sir.
Well, I'll make this as quickly as possible. My name is Mark Levy. I work at Wyandotte Center for Behavioral Health Care. And a lot of our consumers, we mentioned Medicaid earlier, depend on Medicaid to receive their services. And these services are very expensive. They include psychiatric care, medicines, case management, and they're all designed to help them live more independent lives, keep them out of hospitals, which are more expensive, keep them out of jails, and most importantly, to help them realize their full human potential. And I'm wondering on the issue of Medicaid, where you stand on Medicaid block grants, because the way we see it, that would seriously cut into our ability to pay for these services that basically help people live more independent lives and become less of a burden on the system instead of more.
I'm in favor of giving the states more flexibility to make these decisions. The partnership that the federal government has, Medicaid is paid about 60% by the federal taxpayers, about 40% by the state taxpayers. And we need to give our elected officials a greater latitude to make decisions and priorities. but we also ought to have a sense of what the federal priorities are that we can't undercut, at least overnight, the system that we put in place. And so I'm anxious to have this conversation, sit down and try to sort out how we do this in a responsible way. And incidentally, I would volunteer to come spend some time. I spent a lot of time with mental health associations. Community mental health at Wall Hill. His predecessor, I have a long history. I one time joined the meth caucus, and the newspapers reported Moran involved in meth. So I didn't like the way I said that, but I have a long history with mental health centers. And I'd be glad to come see what you do here and get your perspective.
We'd love to have you. Thank you.
I appreciate the hospitality that you extended to me. I smiled at my town hall meeting in Lansing for Leavenworth County a couple months ago, and there was a police officer at the front door when I came in. This was shortly after the tragedy in Arizona. And I tell the police officer, you really don't need to be here for me. I'm fine. And we had a nice conversation. And then the lady in the front row said, in one of her comments and questions is, I can't believe we're paying for law enforcement to protect you. And what's it going to cost to protect all 535 of you? This is just stupid. And I engaged to say, I agree with you. I don't need protection. I didn't invite this officer. I think he has much more important things to do than to be here to protect me. And the city manager was in the back of the row, and he immediately goes like this. He goes, no, no, no. That police officer is not here to protect you. He's here to protect the citizens of Lansing. Good politics on the part of the city manager and put me in my place. The big head. But you all treated me very well, and I appreciate the conversation. Again, there are some issues in which we are in total agreement, and that's the nature of democracy, but I'm interested in knowing your perspective and trying to figure out where I'm wrong. I recognize that I don't have all the answers, and a conversation with Kansans who always have good judgment and common sense and well-intentioned is very helpful to me. If I can be of help to you, almost everybody who works for you in our office in Washington, D.C. is a Kansan, so they bring a very Kansas perspective. My staff was introduced from our office in Olathe. You were welcome to use them. I think a sheet was passed around that we solicited your email address if I'm not spam to you. We do a weekly email newsletter that kind of outlines my thoughts, where I'm going to be, how to catch up with